Today we're taking a journey across America and beyond to visit the final resting places of some of Hollywood's brightest young talents. These are the child stars whose faces lit up our screens, whose voices sang the songs we still remember, and whose lives, in one way or another, ended far too soon. Some of them you'll know the moment I say their name. Others might surprise you. All of them have a story worth hearing. Let's begin. We start where so many Hollywood stories begin and end. At Hollywood Forever Cemetery, right in the heart of Los Angeles, where the Paramount Studios water tower is visible just over the south wall. It was here, in 2017, that the remains of Judy Garland were finally brought home. Born Frances Ethel Gumm in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, she was performing on stage with her two older sisters by the time she was 2.5 years old. At 13, she was signed by MGM, and by 17, she had become an international sensation as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. That performance earned her a special Academy Juvenile Award and gave the world one of its most enduring songs. She would go on to star in more than 30 films, including Meet Me in St. Louis, Easter Parade, and the 1954 version of A Star is Born, which earned her a second Academy Award nomination. She picked up a third nomination years later for Judgment at Nuremberg. Along the way, she won 5 Grammy Awards, a Tony Award, and became the first female performer named an honorary corporal for her efforts entertaining troops during World War II. But the studio system was brutal to her. MGM put the teenage Garland on a punishing schedule of pills, amphetamines to keep her energy up, barbiturates to bring her down at night. And the cycle of dependency that began in her girlhood would shadow her for the rest of her life. She was married 5 times. She battled addiction, financial ruin, and crushing self-doubt. Yet she never lost that voice, and she never stopped performing. In the last 2 years of her life alone, she completed 120 concerts. She died in London in 1969 at the age of 47 from an accidental overdose of a prescription sleeping medication. For nearly 50 years, she was interred at Ferncliff Cemetery in New York, but her children, Liza Minnelli, Lorna Luft, and Joey Luft, wanted to bring their mother home to Hollywood. In 2017, on what would have been her 95th birthday, Judy Garland was laid to rest in a mausoleum pavilion bearing her name right here at Hollywood Forever, with space set aside so that her family can one day join her. Not far from where Judy rests, in the garden section of this same cemetery, lies another child star whose trajectory could not have been more different. You know him as Alfalfa, the freckle-faced, cowlick sporting kid whose spectacularly off-key singing made him the breakout star of the Our Gang comedies, later rerun on television as The Little Rascals. Carl Switzer was just 7 years old when he and his brother Harold wandered into the Hal Roach Studios cafeteria in 1934 and started singing for anyone who would listen. Producer Hal Roach signed both boys on the spot. Over the next 5 years, Carl appeared in dozens of Our Gang shorts, becoming one of the most recognized children in America. His trademark was that spectacularly sour rendition of popular love songs. No kid in the history of cinema has ever sung so badly with such conviction. By 1937, Alfalfa had eclipsed even Spanky McFarland as the series' most popular character. But he never saw a dime in royalties. The concept barely existed in the 30s, and when the Our Gang films were later syndicated on television as The Little Rascals and became hugely popular all over again, Switzer still received nothing. He landed bit parts here and there, including a brief appearance in It's a Wonderful Life, but he was typecast for life. As an adult, Switzer reinvented himself as a hunting guide and dog breeder, counting Jimmy Stewart and Roy Rogers among his clients. It was a dispute over a hunting dog that killed him. In January 1959, Switzer went to the home of a man named Bud Stilts to collect what he said was a $50 debt related to a lost dog. An altercation broke out, and Stilts shot Switzer with a revolver. Carl Switzer was 31 years old. A coroner's jury ruled it justifiable homicide. His gravestone here at Hollywood Forever features an image of a hunting dog, not Petey from Our Gang, as visitors sometimes assume, but a tribute to the hunting life he had built for himself long after the cameras stopped rolling. Let's head across town now to a much smaller and quieter place, Westwood Village Memorial Park, tucked inconspicuously between high-rise office buildings in the Westwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. This pocket-sized cemetery holds an astonishing concentration of famous names, and among them is a little girl whose 4 words became one of the most quoted lines in horror film history. Heather O'Rourke was just 5 years old when Steven Spielberg spotted her eating lunch with her mother in the MGM commissary. Her older sister Tammy was shooting a film on the lot that day. Spielberg cast her on the spot as Carol Ann Freeling in Poltergeist. Interestingly, Drew Barrymore had also been considered for the role. She went to Spielberg's other production that year, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, instead. Heather's wide blue eyes and whispered delivery of the line that became the film's tagline made her an instant pop culture fixture. That line would later land at number 69 on the American Film Institute's list of the 100 greatest movie quotes. She reprised the role in 2 sequels and became a familiar face on television, appearing in recurring roles on Happy Days, Webster, and other shows. Throughout her brief career, she was nominated for 6 Young Artist Awards. In early 1987, Heather developed flu-like symptoms that were eventually diagnosed as Crohn's disease. She was put on medication and continued filming Poltergeist 3 without complaint. Then, on Super Bowl Sunday in January 1988, she became violently ill. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered that what she actually had was a congenital defect, an abnormal narrowing of her intestine that had gone undetected since birth. Septic shock set in. She suffered 2 cardiac arrests on the operating table. Heather O'Rourke was 12 years old. Poltergeist 3 was released 4 months after her death. Staying here at Westwood for a moment, because just steps from Heather's resting place lies another young woman connected to the very same film. Dominique Dunne played Dana Freeling, Carol Ann's older sister, in the original Poltergeist, meaning that she and Heather O'Rourke, whose resting place we just visited, are buried in the same small cemetery, co-stars reunited in death. Dominique came from Hollywood royalty. Her father was the writer and producer Dominic Dunne, her uncle was the novelist John Gregory Dunne, and her aunt was the celebrated author Joan Didion. Dominique was just 22, with a career on the rise, when her ex-boyfriend John Sweeney strangled her in the driveway of her West Hollywood home on October 30th, 1982. She never regained consciousness and died 5 days later. Sweeney was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 6.5 years, of which he served less than 3. The lenient sentence devastated Dominique's family. Her father, Dominic Dunne, channeled his grief into a second career as a journalist covering high-profile criminal trials, becoming one of the most prominent voices for victims' rights in America. That 2 young actresses from the same film would both die so young, and so unexpectedly, fueled the persistent legend of a so-called poltergeist curse, a notion their families and co-workers have always rejected. There was no curse. There was only terrible luck. And in Dominique's case, a violent man who was never adequately punished. Now we leave Los Angeles entirely, and our next stop is one of the most haunting in all of American burial history. There is no grave to visit, really, not in any traditional sense. Bobby Driscoll, the boy who gave Peter Pan his voice, is buried somewhere on Hart Island in the Bronx, New York City's Potter's Field, the place where unclaimed and unidentified bodies are interred in mass graves. How does an Academy Award-winning child star end up in an unmarked pauper's grave? Bobby Driscoll was the first actor Walt Disney ever put under personal contract. He starred in Song of the South, So Dear to My Heart, and Treasure Island, and at the age of 12 he received a special Academy Juvenile Award for his outstanding performances. He then served as the animation model and voice for the title character in Disney's Peter Pan in 1953, making him the first male actor ever to play Peter Pan, a role that had traditionally gone to women. But adolescence came with acne and a deepening voice, and Disney terminated his contract almost immediately after the film's release. Years later, Driscoll would sum up his experience with a bitterness that still stings. He said he had been carried on a silver platter and then dumped into the garbage can. The industry that had adored him as a boy wanted nothing to do with him as a teenager. Struggling to find work, Driscoll turned to drugs, was arrested multiple times, and served time in prison. He drifted to New York in the mid-1960s, briefly joining Andy Warhol's factory scene as an artist. On March 30th, 1968, two boys playing in an abandoned tenement on East 10th Street found his body lying on a cot. He was 31, no identification was found, and no one in the neighborhood recognized his face. His body was buried as a John Doe. It was not until a year and a half later that his mother, searching for her son, obtained his fingerprints through Disney and matched them with the unidentified body. Bobby Driscoll's remains are still on Hart Island. His name appears on his father's gravestone at a cemetery in Oceanside, California, but it is only a memorial marker. The boy who played the child who never grew up lies somewhere beneath the grass of an island that most New Yorkers have never visited. From the saddest possible resting place, we turn to a child star who has no resting place at all, at least not one you can find on a map. Anissa Jones was America's sweetheart in Pigtails, beloved as little Buffy Davis on the CBS sitcom Family Affair, which ran from 1966 to 1971. She was 8 when she got the part and carried a rag doll named Mrs. Beasley that became a best-selling toy. But when the show was canceled and Jones was 13, she found herself typecast and unable to land new roles. She auditioned for The Exorcist, but didn't get the part. The director felt audiences would only see Buffy being possessed. Off-screen, her parents had divorced, and Jones grew increasingly lost. On August 28, 1976, she was found dead in a friend's home in Oceanside, California. The coroner described her overdose, a combination of cocaine, PCP, quaaludes, and barbiturates, as one of the most severe he had ever recorded. Anissa Jones was 18 years old. Her ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. She left behind almost no possessions, and her story is one of the earliest and starkest cautionary tales about what happens when a child star's show ends, and nobody has a plan for what comes next. Our journey takes us now to a ranch near the small town of Micanopy, Florida, about 10 miles south of Gainesville. This is where the ashes of River Phoenix were scattered in 1993, on the property his family called home. River Phoenix burst into the public consciousness at 15 with his role as the narrator, Chris Chambers, in Rob Reiner's Stand By Me. 2 years later, his performance in Running on Empty earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, along with the Best Supporting Actor honor from the National Board of Review. At 18, he was among the youngest Oscar nominees in that category's history. He went on to play the young Indiana Jones opposite Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and gave a raw, acclaimed performance in My Own Private Idaho. Phoenix was also a passionate environmentalist and devoted vegan who purchased hundreds of acres of rainforest in Costa Rica and Brazil to protect them from development. He formed a band called Aleka's Attic with his sister Rain. On Halloween night 1993, while visiting Johnny Depp's nightclub, the Viper Room on the Sunset Strip, Phoenix collapsed on the sidewalk outside. He died of a drug overdose at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He was 23. His younger brother Joaquin, who was 19 at the time, had made the frantic call to 911. Decades later, Joaquin named his own son River. Heading back to Southern California now, let's talk about a show that seemed cursed from the start, and not in the supernatural sense. Different Strokes debuted on NBC in 1978 and became one of the most popular family comedies on television. But the fates of its 3 child leads became a grim cautionary trilogy. We'll visit 2 of them. Gary Coleman was the show's breakout star, a 10-year-old whose catchphrase became part of the American vocabulary. At the peak of his fame, he was the highest-paid child actor on television, earning as much as $100,000 per episode. But Coleman suffered from a congenital kidney condition that stunted his growth and required 2 transplants and daily dialysis throughout his life. After the show ended, he successfully sued his parents and former business advisor for misappropriating his earnings, but much of the money was already gone. Coleman declared bankruptcy, worked as a security guard, and made headlines mostly for legal troubles. He died in 2010, at the age of 42, from an intracranial hemorrhage after a fall at his home in Santaquin, Utah. In keeping with his wishes, no funeral was held, and his ashes were scattered near a railroad track in Illinois. Coleman's Different Strokes co-star Dana Plato followed a parallel path of decline. She played Kimberly Drummond, the older sister, and was a fixture of the show for its first 6 seasons. When she became pregnant at 19, producers fired her, feeling a pregnancy didn't fit the show's wholesome image. After the show ended, her career collapsed into low-budget films. In 1991, she robbed a Las Vegas video store. The clerk famously told the 911 dispatcher that he had just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Different Strokes. On May 7, 1999, Plato appeared on The Howard Stern Show, where she was confronted on air about her sobriety. The next day, while visiting her fiancé's mother's home in Moore, Oklahoma, for Mother's Day weekend, she died from an overdose of prescription painkillers and muscle relaxants. She was 34. Her death was ruled to have been by her own hand. Her ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. In a heartbreaking coda, her son Tyler took his own life in 2010, almost exactly 11 years to the day after his mother's death. Let's leave that sadness behind and travel to the hills above Los Angeles, to Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. It's a sprawling, park-like cemetery with sweeping views of the valley below, and it is here that we find one of the most gut-wrenching stories on our entire journey. Judith Barcy was a 10-year-old voice actress whose work you have almost certainly heard, even if you never knew her name. She was the voice of Ducky in the animated film The Land Before Time, the little dinosaur whose cheerful catchphrase was an enthusiastic "Yep, yep, yep." She also voiced the character Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. Both films were directed by Don Bluth, who called her absolutely astonishing, and intended to feature her extensively in his future projects. Off-screen, Judith's home life was a nightmare. Her father, Josef Barcy, a Hungarian immigrant and unemployed plumber, was a violent alcoholic who repeatedly threatened to kill his wife and daughter. Despite intervention by Judith's agent and a child psychologist, and despite reports to Child Protective Services, the situation was never resolved. On July 25, 1988, Josef shot Judith while she slept in her bed, then killed her mother Maria in the hallway. 2 days later, he set fire to their bodies and took his own life in the garage. Judith and her mother were buried in unmarked graves here at Forest Lawn. For 16 years, there was nothing to mark where they lay. Then, in 2004, a group of devoted fans raised the money to purchase headstones. Judith's reads, in part, "Our concrete angel, yep, yep, yep." Neither The Land Before Time nor All Dogs Go to Heaven had been released at the time of her death. Audiences fell in love with her voice without ever knowing what had happened to the girl behind it. From one voice, Silence Too Young, we move to a face that graced teen magazine covers across America. Corey Haim was born in Toronto and discovered acting as a shy kid enrolled in drama classes to build his confidence. By 15, he had become a bona fide teen idol, starring alongside Kiefer Sutherland and Jason Patric in The Lost Boys, the 1987 vampire film that became a generational touchstone. Paired with his frequent co-star and close friend Corey Feldman, the two became known simply as the Two Coreys and appeared together in 7 films. Haim also starred in the coming-of-age film Lucas alongside Charlie Sheen and Winona Ryder, a performance many critics considered his finest. But the pressures of young fame and the easy availability of drugs sent Haim into a tailspin that lasted most of his adult life. He sought rehabilitation at least 15 times. By the 2000s, he was largely broke, living in Los Angeles, and struggling to find work. He died on March 10, 2010, at his mother's apartment in Burbank. The cause of death was pneumonia, compounded by an enlarged heart and hardened arteries, the cumulative toll of decades of hard living. He was 38. His body was returned to the Toronto area, where he was buried at Pardes Shalom Cemetery in Vaughan, Ontario, just north of the city where he was born. His mother chose every word on the black granite headstone, which reads in part, "You are a bright shining star that will live on for eternity." Heading south again to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the childhood of our next subject could not have been further from the Hollywood bubble. Brad Renfro grew up in a working-class family and was discovered at age 10 by a casting director scouting real kids in Tennessee schools. He was cast opposite Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones in the 1994 legal thriller The Client, based on the John Grisham novel, and his raw, natural performance made him an overnight sensation. He went on to appear alongside major stars in films like Sleepers, Apt Pupil, and Ghost World. Critics thought he had a long career ahead of him. But Renfro struggled with substance abuse from his teenage years onward, and his legal troubles mounted. Arrests for drug possession, probation violations, and stints in rehab. On January 15, 2008, he was found dead in his Los Angeles apartment. The cause of death was an accidental heroin overdose. Brad Renfro was 25. His death came exactly 1 week before the death of Heath Ledger, which dominated the news cycle and overshadowed Renfro's passing almost entirely. He was cremated, and his remains were returned to his family in Tennessee. When the Academy Awards held their annual In Memoriam segment that year, Renfro's name was not included, an omission that drew widespread criticism and underscored how quickly Hollywood can forget its own. We crossed the country once more, back to California, for a young man whose talent seemed limitless. Jonathan Brandis grew up in Danbury, Connecticut, and was acting in commercials before he could read. By his early teens, he had appeared in a string of television shows and earned a starring role in the 1990 film The Never-Ending Story 2. But it was his lead role as the teenage prodigy, Lucas Wolenzak, on the science fiction series Sequest DSV, which premiered in 1993, that made him a household name and a fixture on the bedroom walls of millions of teenage girls. Fan mail poured in by the thousands. When the show was canceled after 3 seasons, Brandis transitioned to smaller film and television roles, but the parts he wanted, serious adult dramatic work, proved elusive. Friends later said he took the stalling of his career extremely hard. On November 12, 2003, Jonathan Brandis took his own life at his apartment in Los Angeles. He was 27 years old. He was cremated, and no public memorial was held. His passing was mourned quietly by a generation that had grown up watching him. And it highlighted a problem the industry has been slow to address. What happens to child stars when the fame recedes and no one has taught them how to build a life beyond it? For our final stop, we return to Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where we began, and we close with perhaps the greatest child star of them all, a performer whose career spanned 9 decades and who embodied both the extraordinary heights and the painful depths of growing up in front of a camera. Mickey Rooney first appeared on stage in his parents' vaudeville act before he was 2 years old. By the time he was 6, he was appearing in short films, and from 1927 to 1934 he starred in 78 installments of the Mickey Maguire comedy shorts. At 14, he was cast as the irrepressible Andy Hardy in a series of films that would eventually number 16 entries and make him the biggest box office draw in America from 1939 to 1941. Ahead of Clark Gable, ahead of Spencer Tracy, ahead of everyone. He was paired with Judy Garland, whom we met at the start of our tour, in a string of beloved musicals including Babes in Arms and Girl Crazy, and their youthful chemistry was electric. The studio kept them so busy that the 2 teenagers barely had time to be teenagers. Rooney received his first Academy Award nomination at 18 for Babes in Arms and a special Juvenile Academy Award in 1939 for his contribution to bringing the spirit and personification of youth to the screen. He went on to earn 3 more Oscar nominations over the decades, including one for The Black Stallion in 1979 and another for Bill in 1981. He won an Emmy and a Golden Globe. He served in the Army during World War II, entertaining troops across Europe. He was married 8 times. He battled financial troubles and, late in life, became a vocal advocate against elder abuse after members of his own family were accused of exploiting him. Mickey Rooney worked until the very end, appearing in the 2011 film The Muppets and the 2014 drama night at the museum, Secret of the Tomb, which was released after his death. He passed away on April 6, 2014, at the age of 93. He is interred here at Hollywood Forever, not far from his old friend and co-star Judy Garland. Two kids from the MGM lot who changed the movies, together again. And that brings our journey to a close. 15 lives, 15 stories, some cut tragically short, others stretched across an entire century, all of them shaped by the peculiar blessing and burden of childhood fame. Thanks for walking with us today.